Hi, Shannon Waller here, and welcome to Inside Strategic Coach with Dan Sullivan. Dan, we were just talking about ambition, and someone asked you a really interesting question, and that is, what does ambition look like at 80? And you had a really interesting answer. So let's talk about ambition, especially as you get older. And most people assume that ambition is going to be going down, but of course, you have a slightly different perspective.
I was at lunch with strategic coach clients, but they were from another coach's workshops. And, we have a cafe in our Toronto office. So I was having lunch and a whole slew of them sat down with me. And they were saying, you're doing so much. It's obvious you're writing books, you're creating new thinking tools and podcasts. And they said, it seems like you're very ambitious at 80. When you're 80 years old, what's your ambition? And I thought about it and I said, when I'm 90, I want to be a lot more ambitious than I am at 80. And people said, whoa, how do you do that? And in strategic coach terms, the central concept in strategic coach being unique ability, that from 80 to 90, I've been in my unique ability more and more, but I really have to go totally into my unique ability, just doing what I'm great at, uniquely great at, and love doing. And then I keep expanding my unique ability teamwork within strategic coach, which is much greater at 80 than it was at 70. And then I just take into account that every 10 years, individuals who are operating in their unique ability, their impact is multiplied through technology, their productivity and their overall impact. So I said, that's just going to be a natural thing. So what my unique ability is connecting to 2034 is going to be much greater than it is now. And therefore I can have as goals much bigger impacts in the world 10 years from now than I have right now.
Well, and this is part of your long life plan. Like 90, talk about your lifetime goal and how long you want to live, Dan. Because if someone was checking out at 91, probably wouldn't have quite the same emphasis that you do.
Yeah, there's actually two ways of approaching this. But in 1987, I was 43 years old. And the idea came into my mind. It's a long story, so I will just get to the punchline. An idea came into my mind that I wanted to live to 156. Now, the reason for that number is that I was born in 1944, so I couldn't live a complete century during the 20th century, but I could live a complete century during the 21st century, so 156. And I've been working on this steadily. Virtually daily, I make a note or something about this 156-year lifetime. So everybody in Strategic Coach, all of the clients in Strategic Coach, all of our team members, they do the lifetime extender. And what it does, it changes your understanding of the present. Once your brain normalizes the idea that you're going to live way, way longer than, normal expectations, you suddenly don't get freaked out about the future at all because you have more than enough time to do anything right now. Actually, it has an interesting thing, and I've noticed this between ages 70 and 80, that it actually slows down time. I'm actually noticing that time is going slower between 80 and 90 than it was between 70 and 80. And part of the reason is that time only speeds up when you think you're running out of it.
That's great, Dan. Say that again. Time only slows down?
Yeah, time only seems to go faster when you think you don't have much time left. Then it goes really, really fast.
Right.
But if you think you always have more than enough time, for example, to start a big project at age 80, I have one with two collaborators outside of Strategic Coach. And it's a 25-year project, and I'm committing myself to this at age 80. One of the other collaborators is 68, and he was at a ski resort talking to a number of entrepreneurs who were in their 30s and 40s. And they said, how do you think about and commit to something that's going to take 25 years when you're 68? And he says, that's nothing. One of my other collaborators, he's 80 and he's doing it. He's going to 105. And then they ordered more drinks. And he said it was one of the most fascinating discussions. And then he explained, he's in the program, he's in coach for 12 years, and he's embedded in the project with his own
Mhm.
extended lifetime. He actually told me when he joined, which was when he was 56, that he planned to retire when he was 65. Now he's got a much longer time frame.
That's very cool.
Yeah,
Lifetime extender
yeah.
is a thing.
The other thing that's been happening, during these 37 years is a constant emergence of new technologies related to health and fitness, regenerative medicine.
Hmm.
And I'm more or less convinced right now, after 30 years of really taking advantage of these breakthroughs, that if I can diagnose it early enough, anything that's wrong can be fixed.
Hmm.
Cancer, heart disease, dementia, anything that people normally worry about when they get, 60, 70, and 80.
Hmm.
My measurements are really good.
And Dan, it's interesting with the regenerative medicine. You are definitely willing to invest the time and the money and the measurement because and you do it regularly and the habits to make sure that that's going to be the case. So
Mhm.
what's fun about this for me is that you have so much, I guess, evidence that not only are you going to live that long, but you're going to live incredibly healthily with great brain,
Mhm.
right? And great stamina and great capability. So
Mhm.
why
Mhm.
not? Like you've really taken care of that health and purpose component in terms of living longer. So why not do something fun and ambitious?
Yeah. The other aspect, going back to the ambition
Hmm.
topic
Yeah.
that we started with, is I think another factor that makes people feel that they're aging
Hmm.
and that they're running out of time. They can't imagine themselves 5 years from now being more ambitious than they are right now.
Mm,
And 10 years from now would be even less so. And I think that's kind of like losing your power.
right.
It means new things aren't going to be happening because, when you're ambitious, you have to create a lot of new things and you have to discover a lot of new things, and all sorts of unpredictable new things enter into your life, responding to your
Hmm.
your ambition. I think people get discouraged because they think about ambition in terms of what they had 30 years ago that got them to where they are right now. And now they can't imagine that there's anything that would give them the same commitment and give them the same drive that they had that got them to where they are. And they said, I'm in my state of declining ambition.
It doesn't sound good when you put it that way.
The problem is they're seeing ambition as a noun. You mentioned this, so I'm going to
Hmm.
throw it right back at you. You said, what you've done by that your goal is to be more ambitious. You've made ambition a verb rather than a noun. Most people say ambition, I'm going to have this amount of money. Well, this amount of money is a noun.
Hmm.
You know, we're going to own this and this and this. Those are all nouns. I'm going to achieve this and this and this, and there's events, and those are all nouns. But mine is a verb.
Hmm.
I don't know what I'm actually going to be ambitious about, but I know I'm going to be more ambitious.
I love that. It's such a doing approach to things rather than
Hmm.
having.
Hmm.
It's about doing.
Hmm.
And that's more of a state of being. I think there's an expression or a book called Love is a Verb,
Hmm.
not just a thing. Ambition is also a verb.
Hmm.
And it's that state of
But
being
you can make it into a verb.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. So, Dan, it's cool because when it's an action, you can put, as you've mentioned, talent and skill and time around it. You can really add in all of the elements to success into that activity that you're doing. Is ambition also a skill
Hmm.
as opposed to just a noun?
Yeah, I think it's made up of a number of sub-skills.
Okay.
Acting on your ambition, I think, is a skill, is very definitely a capability. One of our really bedrock concepts in the program are the four C's.
Mhm.
Okay. And the four C's are to make any significant improvement or change in your life, you have to be 100% committed to that. And then you have the commitment, but you don't yet have the capability.
Right.
So the third C is capability. The second C is courage.
Right.
You have to go through a period of courage. There's a gap between commitment and capability. And there you have to jump across a chasm, so to speak. And then I think it's the commitment and the willingness to jump that actually creates the capability when you get there. And then you get the capability and you get a big upshot of confidence. And confidence, in my way of thinking about it, isn't actually a capability. Confidence is a reward for having acquired a new capability. It's a reward. And then at a higher level of reward, you can commit even higher. You rinse, you relather, and
repeat.
Repeat.
I like that. Is a commitment's a byproduct of the capability. That's a great thought. And I was looking for a statement that you'd said before, which is that, people get old when they give up making commitments and being willing to experience courage. So what is the cost of shutting down your ambition, of not being willing to make commitments and be courageous, Dan? What's the cost of that to a human?
Big. It's a big cost. And that's, I think, the dying process starts.
They start sending the parts back.
Yeah, they're in the departure lounge.
Dan, you use this term a lot. It seems to me kind of binary, that people are either expanding or shrinking. They're not really staying the same.
There's no maintaining.
Right. No maintaining. Say more about that.
Well, it takes a lot of work to maintain. It's easier going forward than it is maintaining where you are. Because, first of all, if you're moving, you have momentum behind you. And you not only have your momentum, but you, in the way that I picture it with teamwork and technology, you have as much other momentum from other people's ambitions, their growth, their development, and then the technology is a multiplier. So you have that. But when you stop and you don't commit anymore, there's no one who's interested in being in teamwork with someone who stopped.
Right.
There's no technology that's useful for someone who stopped.
True story.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And Dan, we've been talking about it in the context of 90 versus 80 and being more ambitious at 90. But I think people also stop even at much younger ages. This is not something that's relegated to someone who's older. I see a lot of people who just somehow have disconnected from this.
I haven't gone back to a lot of high school reunions, but I went through school with a really very congenial group of people. I don't remember any major fights or conflicts or, that is pictured about, with teenagers and everything like that.
Right.
The group that I went through, they were very pleasant to be with and congenial. I use the word congenial. So it was 25 years later. I graduated at 18, so I was 43. 1962, so this was 1987. So I was telling friends, in Toronto where we live, that I was going back. So we'd get together and they'd say, how'd that high school reunion go? And I said, well, nobody showed up. And they said, nobody showed up? Oh, I said, no, they sent a bunch of old people in their place. And they're 43 and they were talking about retirement. They were talking about, another 10 years of this and everything. So people can be old at 18.
Right.
And people can be young at 80. It all has to do with what lies ahead of you, in your imagination.
So having that imagination keeps you young is one thing, or it certainly gives you incentive to maximize your capabilities. I like that. And one of the other things that you've talked about is always make friends with younger people.
In an appropriate way.
100%. And I've noticed that because, first of all, you'll find out what's relevant to them in terms of how you need to show up to be someone of interest that they want to be in teamwork with. But it's fun because they see the world differently. They have different ambitions. They know technology better than I ever will in a lot of cases. And so it just opens up whole new realms of possibility that weren't there before if you just hang out with people of your own vintage, I think.
I don't know if I really spend much time with many people who are even 10 years younger than I am.
Hmm.
The age frame, of my entrepreneurs that I coach, I have two now who are 50 years younger.
Right.
Both of them, I think, are 29.
One just turned 30.
Yeah, yeah. So 30 is still 50,
Yeah.
still 50 years. But the way you simply communicate with them is you ask them about what their ambition is and you tell them what your ambition is. And immediately that 50-year age gap disappears
Mhm.
because all they're looking for, and we talked about this, we were doing a book recording about leadership yesterday. This was quite a breakthrough that what human beings most look for in other human beings is commitment and courage.
Yeah.
And so if you have that at 80 and it's even larger than someone who is 30, you're very interesting to them.
Mhm.
And from my perspective, I'm very encouraging to them.
Well, yeah, and it's fun to have that commitment and courage be encouraged by other people
Mhm.
and supported and excited for them. I know because I do that with a lot of my daughter's friends, so they're in their 20s, and I'm like, I'm so encouraging of them. Like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. You could do this, and have you thought about this resource? And this is amazing what you're up to. And they're like, you just see them unfold. It's really fun
Yeah,
because they don't have that. They don't have other people who are necessarily supporting their ambition. So I think that's something actually that entrepreneurs are better suited,
they're better equipped.
much better equipped to support other people's ambitions. And that's probably something we would take for granted.
The other thing is, it doesn't matter what shape or form other human beings show up in,
Right.
as long as they're committed and courageous. Okay. And it's a universal language. We even recognize it in enemies,
Right.
people you don't like. I mean, you recognize and you respect it in other people. And I think that was a great breakthrough that we had yesterday in that thought. What is it that you look for in other people? And you look for those two things.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying. Books are written about, movies are made about. And the really cool thought that came out is this is what we have in common, right? The ability to make a commitment and to go through periods of courage. The capabilities that we generate are very unique and individual to us, but we have commitment and courage in common.
Yeah, we don't have capability and confidence in a way that's really visible to other people. Most people, your capabilities, unless you're dealing directly with someone, their capabilities are not immediately obvious. But their commitment and courage is readily available. It's an energy
Mhm.
that you pick up on the other person. They're really committed
Mhm.
and they're being very courageous about their jumping to the next level of capability. I've become a big fan of seagoing stories, novels. These are historical novels, and they're usually British Navy, and it's around 1800.
Mhm.
It's during the Napoleonic Wars, and Great Britain had the greatest navy in the world at that time. And there's just this incident that I was just reading this morning where the hero of the story, there's about 8 novels, and it just follows this person from his 20s right up to, mid 40. I think I'm not to the end yet. And they're sailing with a convoy from Portsmouth in the UK to Halifax. And just before they get to Halifax, there's a gale that comes from probably a hurricane.
So Halifax, Nova Scotia? Oh,
Halifax, Nova Scotia. Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry. So long trip.
Yeah.
And right in the middle of the gale, there's just a phenomenal lightning strike that destroys the main mast. It just shreds the main mast, goes right from the top right down to the bottom. But there's just a 20 or so
Okay.
sailors.
Okay.
2 of them got killed by the lightning flash, but the others are burnt, and so this hero of the story, his name is Wharton, John Wharton, and he's the first lieutenant, so he's just right under the captain of the ship. And there's a midshipman who is much older than you should be as a midshipman. They usually start when they're on board. They can start as young as 11 or 12.
Wow.
And by the time they're 18, they've learned navigation, they've learned everything there is about the ship, and they become officers. They
Mm.
move from a midshipman. They're not a sailor and they're not an officer, they're a midshipman.
Yeah.
And this fellow is 24 And part of the reason is he's not good at navigation, so he can't pass his examinations. But in the middle of the storm, he more or less takes control of the scene and he goes around and he checks and he starts getting help to remove the wounded sailors and take them down, the injured sailors and
Mhm.
take them into the hold. Then he comes and he helps the person at the wheel and he says, hold steady, now hold steady. Okay, now, and then he brings other people to hold the wheel and everything else. And he's just utterly calm and cool. And the new lieutenant who found this person a bit troubling, he's still a midshipman at 24. Why do they still have him around? They have him
Mhm.
around for this type of situation.
Yep.
He's committed and courageous in the worst possible circumstances. This is what every human being is looking for in another human being,
Yep.
except if you who are looking are not committed and courageous, then you find it a threat.
I think that's a really key point, Dan. Like if you aspire to that, then you love reading stories about it. You love, as you just talked about, you love watching movies about it. You love hearing other people talk about it. But if you personally cannot make a commitment or won't make a commitment and are not willing to go through that period of courage, those stories feel probably threatening. You're like, that's a bad thing. You want to push it
Yeah.
away. And you probably argue against people who are doing that.
Yeah. So I'd like to tie it back to ambition.
Hmm.
If at 80 I am more committed and I'm more courageous, it's easy to be more ambitious.
Right. Yeah. So commitment and courage are intimately connected to ambition.
Well, you can't have courage without the commitment,
Hmm.
and the commitment doesn't go anywhere without the courage.
I really like that. So, Dan, if people want to strengthen this capability for themselves and want to lean into commitment and courage and in expanding their ambition as a verb, not just a noun, what are some things that they can do? How can they take action on that?
Today, commit to developing a capability that you don't have right now.
Hmm. Nice. Nice. One other thing that just came to mind as I asked the question, and I did this with the group last night that I was coaching, is to reflect back where you've done it already. And this is one of your great coaching points, is you've already done this. And
Yeah,
once you recognize it, it's easier.
borrow from the past.
Yes.
Yeah, well, 60 years ago, I was in Scotland at an Outward Bound program. Anybody who wants, just look it up on Google.
Hmm.
It was a long, long trek through the mountains, and they're not Rocky Mountains, but they're 2,000 feet up, 3,000 feet down, and you're carrying a 60-pound pack. The first day of this, I just didn't know if I could do it at all. And I just sat down on a big rock, and the guide came back to me. I remember his name was Ron Swanson, and he looked like the historic Lawrence of Arabia. No, he actually could have been a relative.
Hmm.
He came back and he says, "What are you doing?" I says, I don't know if I can go forward. And he said to me, "Oh, so this is where you stop?" And I said, "What?" He says, "Well, this is where you stop. Everybody, I guess, stops somewhere. This is where you stop." And I said, "No, this isn't where I stop." And he says, "Well, where do you stop? Somewhere up there?" And I said, "Yeah, wait, let's go up there and stop." And then he literally badgered me. And he did it about 4 or 5 times. And then it was the end of the day. Fortunately, it was in the middle of the afternoon and it gets very dark very quickly in Scotland. So we had to pitch camp. And I was really mad at him. I was really angry. I was embarrassed, really. I was very embarrassed. And I got up the next morning and I could run up and down hills just like he could.
Wow.
After the course was finished, we had sort of a dinner. And he sat down to me and he said, if you had stopped right then, and you had said, I just can't go any further, we would have found someone. We had to use someone who would take you back to the camp. But the next time you were in a situation where you had to go forward, it would be 10 times more difficult.
Mm.
He says, so whenever you're up against it, your whole future is depending on whether you go forward or you just stop.
That's
In all my life, I've been through many forms of education and training. That afternoon, is the number one experience I had in my entire life from a standpoint of courage.
Uh-huh. What great coaching. I love that.
Yeah. And that's why when someone's committed to something and you've told me about it, I'm going to remind you.
Good. And Dan, that also ties into me of that flash that you had when you're a boy in the Ohio farm, watching that plane go overhead. It's like, oh, how far can I go?
Yeah, I had this sort of a boom, and a question came into my mind, 10 going on 11, if I remember correctly. And the question was, I wonder how far I can go. And that's been my life. When I reach one level of success, one level of growth, personally, and then in terms of strategic coach, I said, now I wonder how far we can go. So I've been living a question.
Living a question and not stopping. I can't think of a better way to describe ambition, Dan, than those two.
The motto of Outward Bound, I'm trying to think, it's a British poet. There's a poem called Ulysses. I'd have to look it up. I'm not up on my poetry. But the line is to seek, to strive, and not to yield. That's the thing. And I was certainly striving or finding it hard to strive, but I didn't yield.
Dan, that is such a perfect way to conclude this conversation about ambition and about courage. So thank you. As always, expands my thinking. And I'm leaving this conversation feeling more committed in my own self to always expanding and always growing and always being ambitious. So thank you very much.
Thank you.